Amber, welcome back. Very happy to have you for the second time here on our podcast. And
Thank you.
last time we we probably would have continued for hours and hours. There's enough to talk about. And the thing that we kind of stopped at and wanted to get into was your work on satiety. And the theme of satiety seems to be something which comes up very, very frequently in the low-carb and carnivore community. I'm calling it the low-carb and carnivore community in a broad sense. And I think we do agree on the strict definition of carnivore. But anyway, we want to welcome as many people as possible and talk a little bit about that. You've done some work on and some research on satiety. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I've been heavily influenced for many, many years by the view of what makes people hungry that I learned, I think, initially from Gary Taubes, and that I think he was heavily influenced in turn by Mark Friedman, who was writing in the 90s, and he was talking about fuel partitioning in particular. So to give a kind of just a very brief and not thorough background, there have been a lot of ideas in the past about what drives hunger and what drives stopping eating. And there have been ideas, for example, that the body has this set idea of how much body fat it wants, and that's a set point, and that the actual amount of body fat is what the body is trying to regulate for homeostatically. And that doesn't seem to be actually true. There are all kinds of signals going on. There's signals in the gut, there's signals in the blood, there's signals coming from your fat tissue, and the hypothalamus, parts of the hypothalamus are integrating all this information, and eventually somehow it is assumed that the amount of information is integrated to the point that it turns into the behavior of actually eating or actually not eating. But what Mark Friedman had said is that, for one thing, it's not an amount of fat on the body that the body is trying to regulate for. And I think that would be really hard to do from a signaling point of view. But it's actually just how much energy you are able to get at a given time. And that's really important because that's a sort of moment-to-moment experience where you're making enough energy or you're not making enough energy. And if you are not making enough energy from all sources, then that starts to drive your desire to eat. Further, what Mark Friedman talked about with this fuel partitioning idea that I think Gary Taubes really went running with is the idea that if you eat something, what happens in your body to what you've ingested really matters in terms of whether that's going to lead to satiation. And it almost feels like duh, right? Like if you eat some food and it goes into your body stores, it's not going to make you more satiated. But if it goes directly to your cells and you start generating energy out of it, that's when you're going to get satiation. And he talked about studies, for example, with diabetic rodents who would have severe hyperphagia if they were eating a low-fat diet. And that's because in diabetes, your fatty acid oxidation is turned way up. And so when they gave the same rodents a higher fat proportion diet, they wouldn't have that same amount of hypophagia. They'd eat kind of normally. And what they concluded from that is that because that fat is going directly to cells and being burned, that's creating satiation, whereas that when it was a very high carb and low fat diet, it would just all get stored. And so they would just keep eating and keep eating and keep eating. And I think the same thing happens with people. And I think of the confusion that goes along with all of this satiety business in trying to get all these rules for what's going to give you satiety is that we do have different metabolic conditions for different people. There are people who are very healthy and who are very fit and lean, and they're going to have certain requirements to get satiation that someone who is carrying more body fat, even if they're very healthy, or if they have a different metabolic state like diabetes, or if you're in a ketogenic state, which in many ways looks like a diabetic state in terms of burning fatty acids preferentially for one thing, then you're going to have a completely different satiety or satiation response to the very same foods. And so that's one of the problems that I have with trying to develop these general metrics and telling people this food will create satiety. It's not just that it's an individual thing. I think when people say, there are individual responses. What they mean is my model doesn't understand or doesn't cover what the difference is, right? Because there's always going to be a reason. So that creates a real problem and a lot of confusion, and people say, well, this worked for me, so that's got to be the truth. But maybe they were in a different situation that leads to a very predictable kind of response that would predictably not be the same for somebody else.
Yeah, so would that, let me just, if I understand it right, that would also mean that the same person eating a different diet could then feel satiated on a different diet?
Yes, absolutely.
And so it depends on what your standard diet for you is at any given time, or in a period of time, so to speak.
Yeah. And so I want to talk a little bit about the low-carb carnivore context, because that's probably what our biggest shared audience is. And when you're in a low-carb context, what happens is your hormones change in specific ways. There are all these signaling things that start to change, but one or a pair of very powerful signals that come into play to create the ketogenic context is your insulin to glucagon ratio. And it's a low insulin to glucagon ratio that is associated with the liver generating enough glucose and enough ketones to run all of your body needs that are not going to be using primarily fat. Of course, almost all cells are using a little bit of both. But when you're ketogenic, your muscle cells, most of the periphery is using predominantly fat, and then there's a reserved glucose and ketone bodies for the brain. And so that Ig ratio is really important for keeping that state stable. And one thing that has been pointed out really beautifully in a talk by Ben Beekman, who makes beautiful talks and graphics, he talked about the protein response in terms of blood glucose. And that's also governed by this Ig ratio. So if you're in a high carb context, your Ig ratio is going to be quite high, relatively speaking. And if you get protein and you're a healthy person, non-diabetic, just maybe a serving of protein, I don't know what I mean by that, maybe say 30, 45 grams of protein or something like that. That is going to not change your blood sugar, actually, but it is going to raise your insulin to glucagon ratio. And so it's putting you in a even less, it's not that you were in a ketogenic state, but even further away from the ketogenic state by having that protein, but it shouldn't touch your blood sugar. Whereas if you took that same amount of protein and you were also not on a ketogenic diet, but you were diabetic, you should probably see the opposite. You would see actually a rise in blood sugar without much change in insulin to glucagon ratio. And the same thing is true if you're on a ketogenic diet. You would normally see a rise in blood sugar, but it's a fluctuation. It's not bad, but your Ig will stay stable. Now, what happens if you keep adding more and more protein? Eventually, you will destabilize that ratio and you will go out of the ketogenic state. So I think a lot of confusion about protein and how satiating it is comes from those variables. So let me see if I can get this straight and say what I mean to say here.
Yeah, so just while you're thinking, Amber, I think me and Klaus have had at least two people that we know and we converse with that their sort of satiating hormones in their bodies are so broken that when they went from a ketogenic diet to a carnivore diet, their type 2 diabetes was no longer in remission because they would just eat so much.
And I think that, say, pre-diabetics or post-diabetics, people who haven't really solved their diabetes, even if a ketogenic diet is keeping it under control, they still do not have the protein tolerance that somebody who is non-diabetic would have. And that also causes confusion because a lot of people will say, look, protein does nothing. It's free. You can do as much as you want. And for a lot of people, that's really true because they'll eat a certain amount and it will be satiating. And then it won't kick them out of that low Ig ratio stability. And then other people, they just can't eat that size amount and stay in that position. And so those people would have to either go back to that ketogenic diet or just make their carnivore diet deliberately more ketogenic, which a lot of people do, but it's challenging because you can't really use things like salads to absorb oils. You'd have to eat more rendered and less emulsified fats, or else eat a lot of the actual fat that's on very high fat cuts of meat, which are either hard to find or some people don't like to do it, and it becomes more challenging.
Exactly. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, I think you'd be proud of Goody this week. The gentleman that was with us. I don't know if you saw his post on X, but he's been eating chunks of raw suet. He hasn't even been rendering it down.
I find that quite delicious. I know that's a little bit weird, but
yeah, so
yeah.
No, we've got to try, James.
Yeah,
it's worth a try. I think I used to have a very strict ketogenic diet, and then I kind of slid over to more protein because it's just, for some reason, for me at least, it's just easier to eat slightly less fatty and higher protein. But I think from the way I feel when I do that, I'm definitely not in ketosis. I don't have that feeling at all, even when I don't measure. But it does take. At least for me, if I wanted to be in ketosis and carnivore, it's exactly as you say. I'd have to kind of, I'd say, almost artificially up the fat amount and make sure that the protein doesn't get too high. I find it very easy to eat a lot of protein. So
yeah, you're not alone, and it sounds like it's not something that's disturbing your health, so that's probably fine. And I was always surprised when I first started carnivore, coming from a low-carb background. I noticed that people were less ketogenic, but it didn't seem to have any impact on the results, at least at that time with such a small sample size. A lot of people, put it this way, a lot of people were getting better results on carnivore, even though for them it was only mildly ketogenic now instead of more ketogenic. And that really surprised me because I'd been studying a lot about how ketogenic diets work and what ketosis does. And I thought, this has got to be a major part of the benefit, and being less ketogenic should be worse.
Yes.
I think that those are both sort of independently beneficial, elimination side and the ketogenic side of that. And so some people seem to need both, and some people can do really well with just one or the other.
Yeah, I have, for me, and although it's not all about me, of course, but for me, I'd say I feel fantastic on a strict ketogenic diet. It's just easier it's just somehow in practice, it's just easier to be a little bit, less strict and just stick with the normal meat. And as a result, I mean, my home IR is, I think the last time it was, I had my insulin tested and glucose at the same time. It came out at 0.7 or something like that. So
wow.
Even though it's not ketosis, a lot of deep ketosis, it's still, highly insulin sensitive and seems to work fine. I think there's a lot. I think the one of the things, to me at least, and I'd like to hear your take on that, but it seems to me that we have a lot of our friends here they're kind of looking for the ultimate one type of answer, the orthodoxy on how to do it. And unfortunately, or fortunately, because of what you just said, because we are in different metabolic states, even then when we do certain things, actually the goalposts move, then there's a huge room for confusion. And this confusion that leads to some completely asinine discussions and kind of arguments in our community, rather than just taking it easy and sticking with the basics.
Right. So I think I figured out what I was going to say about the IG ratio and satiation. So just like in the stuff that Friedman brought up about how a diabetic rat has the ability to burn fat really easily, so therefore you give that rat a higher fat diet and it's suddenly a lot more satiating, right? Exactly the same position that we're in when we have really low IG ratio, we're in ketosis, our fatty acid oxidation is ramped all the way up. So now you could give me on a really low IG ratio a meal that has a lot of fat in it, and that's going to be a lot more satiating for me than if I were less ketogenic and my glucose oxidation was more ramped up, and that fat is not going to get used. It's going to get partitioned into storage, and it's not going to be satiating. And so that's why I feel like it's really important to take dietary context into account when you're, so specifically, we mentioned that there are some people who are making scores for what's satiating. And there's this big claim that protein is more satiating than fat. And I think that claim has no real foundation in the ketogenic context. It does have some foundation in the high carb context. And I think it also partly has to do with how much, like what it's substituting for. Like definitely protein is more satiating than carb, I think in any context. And it may be more satiating than fat in a high carb context. I'm not 100% sure that that's even true. But in the low carb context, we do not have any studies that have had the direct comparison to tell us which is more satiating, protein or fat. And it seems based on both the physiology of how ketogenic diets work and the many, many anecdotes from people on ketogenic diets saying that directly that fat gives them satiation, that it's very likely to be the case that fat is more satiating. I'm already kicking myself for saying it this way because what does it mean to be more satiating? Is it within a meal? Is it within a day? Because protein needs also can drive hunger, as we've seen from protein leverage. So if you haven't had any protein today and all you've had is fat, I would be almost flabbergasted if it weren't the case that some protein at this point would be more satiating for you than more fat, because your body is still waiting for that input. But once you've had enough, the calculus of the bet changes. And so the whole day-to-day, what micronutrients you have, how much protein you have, how much energy you have at any given point is all going to tie into what next thing you can eat will be the most satiating.
That makes sense. I keep getting flashbacks for basically work yesterday, which was I was observing people at work and what you've just said about what sort of nutrient groups are driving the hunger. And that does make sense because someone had porridge first thing in the morning, so like oatmeal, and then they had a cereal bar about half an hour later, and then they had pasta for lunch, and they just kept saying how hungry they were throughout the whole day. And I just had to keep everything to myself now because I'm becoming that crazy bloke. Do you know what I mean? But
I spend a lot of time just zipping my lips.
I think that's the best, let's pick that out later as the best advice ever from anyone. Zip your lips. Yeah.
But the other thing, Klaus, but I don't know if you saw at all, but once a year we sort of just eat eggs for a week.
Nice.
It's quite profound. We feel like we're in really deep states of ketosis, like maybe more than even when we're fasting. Zero hunger towards the end of the day because in your mind all you're going to eat are eggs. So sometimes you're like, no, I'll just pass.
Zero hunger at any point.
Yeah, we're probably only getting about 1,200 to 1,400 calories per day, but just like I don't.
Are you eating like 20 eggs or something?
Only about 12 for me.
12.
Yeah, 12. In US terms, 12 jumbo size eggs, which is the same as maybe 15, 17 normal size eggs. So yeah, so it's like it's about 12, let's say 12 to 1,400 calories. I probably normally I'd eat about 3,000. Not the calories. I wanted to ask you about calories as well, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
But looking at it in the specified calories, it's about 40%. In my case, about 40% of what I normally eat to maintaining my weight.
And are you feeling satiated with that?
Extremely satiated. To a point where food becomes something I don't even want to think about, or eating. I don't even want to think about eating.
And it's not just because you don't want to look at another egg. You're
No,
also
oddly enough, oddly enough, when egg week's over, on the first day after egg week, I still have 4 or 5 eggs. So I'm not, I'm not, it doesn't put me off eggs, but it kind of puts me off eating. And at the same time, I feel kind of physically and mentally, I feel absolutely excellent. And my weight goes down. It seems to me subjectively that my weight goes down at least as fast or faster than if I don't eat anything at all. So fasting for weight loss purposes, I don't need to lose any weight, but for weight loss purposes, it seems that it's faster. But I don't know what's going on.
That's interesting. It's almost like a protein sparing modified fast, but not quite that degree of you're still getting enough fat, and
Yes.
I'm not sure how much protein that's going to work out to be. 6,
It's
12, 100.
it's about
grams.
it's about 100 grams of protein per day.
Yeah. That sounds. I should join you next time. Did you do it recently?
Well, are we going to do it in February? Did we say that we were going to do it in February as well, or did I make that up?
I don't. We can. I'm up for being slightly masochistic. I'm up for it. So
yeah,
Back
for scientific purposes.
In 2014, I went to New York City to do a computer science program called Hacker School. The place that I got to live was a dorm like it was a room with shared bathrooms and no kitchen. My whole plan was that I was going to bring one of those egg steamer devices and plug it in and eat basically a dozen eggs a day. And I did do that for a couple of days, and then I was like, Whole Foods is right there. I think I'll go get something else. But
the first 2 days are usually the first 2 days are okay. Day 3, it starts to get to be a bit of a struggle. But the other thing I wanted to ask you, and then I'll get to the calories in, calories out stuff. But
yeah.
But the thing that I find, maybe I'm just it's just me being odd, but with I have no problem continuing to eat outside of any satiation. I don't have to do it, but I can easily eat. Let's say if I eat the amount that makes up 3,000 calories a day, which is I eat the same all the time, so it's just specific eggs and meat, and I can pretty easily eat twice as much if I had to. Of course, I'm not going to feel very good, but I'll feel very twice as satiated. But I think I'm just wondering. I think there might be a few other people out there like me who maybe if they don't have a kind of a focus on what it is they're doing, they have a very easy time to overeat regardless of satiation or satiety signals.
And yeah, I want to ask a lot of questions about this. One of them is, you called it overeating. Do you feel that you gain weight when you do that?
No.
Okay, so maybe it's not overeating.
Yeah, I usually don't do it many. I do it maybe these days. I'd say maybe 2-3 times a year, and probably the next day, because I'm so full. Probably I eat less the next day. It's not a conscious choice, but sometimes I just binge out on whatever it is I'm eating. But maybe satiation is not a 24-hour thing. Maybe
right. One thing I don't often like to admit is that satiation is often experienced as a more graded thing than I like to talk about it as being. And I think we've all had the experience where we feel sort of like we've had basically enough. And if we happen to have just finished what's on our plate, it's not worth the bother of going and getting more, because it was basically enough.
Yes.
And maybe we would have a little bit more if it happened to be there. But something that I've also experienced, and I don't think everyone has experienced it, and I don't always experience it, and I've only experienced it since carnivore, and it's particularly around when I'm eating slightly lower protein and more fat. And I sometimes will get what I sometimes call cement truck satiety, where I could be in the middle of a bite and I suddenly feel like, oh my gosh, I don't even think I can finish this. It's just the end. And I'll be sad because I have this beautiful thing I was looking forward to, and it's just absolutely not. I cannot take another bite. I mean, if you forced me, I would, but like just feels a very hard level of satiation. And I love it when I get that, even if I'm sad about the food, because it just feels so, it feels so clear. And I love getting clear signals from my body.
It's very interesting that you say that, because just a few days ago, I had exactly this experience. I had a bite on my fork, and I had to say, that's it. I put the fork and bite back on the plate, and that was it. Very seldom does that happen. Very, very seldom. But
it's really
super
interesting
clear
when
signal.
it does.
It's just,
Done.
crazy.
Force field.
Yeah.
Was
Anyway,
it any chance?
Yeah, no, it wasn't. It was. It was picanha steak,
Ooh, yeah.
which is very delicious, and it made the signal even more clear because it was extremely tasty, but it was just it was a hard stop.
Right.
Anyway, Amber, about let's move to calories in, calories out, the big eternal discussion, it seems.
Yeah.
So, what is your take on that?
Well, one thing that you just mentioned was sometimes you can eat twice as much without gaining weight. I think the body is very adaptable to making use of more and less fuel. It would have to be, right? Because I think the precision that we would need, like a lot of people are very weight stable and they're not counting calories. And it would really be astonishing for that to ever happen. And I recognize that a lot of people are not weight stable as well.
Yes.
That I think that's when we start looking at calories to be some kind of explanation. But just the fact that so many people, and especially I think earlier in decades past, where people just basically maintained the same weight for years on end without any conscious decision around it, makes it very hard for me to believe that their calorie intake was really the deciding factor. But I also, what I'm really interested in with calorie intake and satiation or satiety is in the situation where you're actually trying to lose weight. A lot of people have this idea that all diets are equally good as long as it's something that you can stick to and it keeps up this deficit of calories. And I think that's a really damaging notion for a couple of reasons. One is not all diets are equally good at making it easy for you to lose weight, and that's just patent nonsense. I mean, it would be true if you were somehow like, if it were true that for a given person, you would lose the same amount of weight no matter what you did, as long as you ate, say, 1,600 calories a day. And then you could say, well, this diet where I'm eating only 1,600 calories worth of cake is the diet that I know I could stick to even if I felt hungry. Then I could see that being logical. But the thing is, it doesn't work like that because of that fuel partitioning again. So some people say a ketogenic diet causes you to have a lower appetite, which allows you to eat less, and that forces your body to use the fat that is on your body, and therefore you lose weight. But it's really kind of backwards. And I feel like sometimes when I explain it, people understand, but often it falls flat, and I'm not sure why. So maybe you can help me with it. But if you're already in a state where you're burning fat really easily and your insulin is low, fat's coming out of your fat cells easily, and fat's burning, oxidizing easily, then the time leading up to before you eat, you're going to be already like eating from your body a certain level that makes it so that when you get to your mealtime, you only need a certain amount of food to get that level of satiation. Because again, satiation is all about meeting that energy demand at any given point. And so it's not that being in ketosis told your brain to feel like it had less appetite. So when you got to your meal, you kind of ate a little less. And so your fat had to come in and fill the gap. It's not like that at all. The fat already came in and filled the gap. And that's why you feel less hungry.
Yes.
And so if you try to do the other thing, so you're not in a ketogenic state, you're doing the cake diet, but you're committed to doing less calories. You eat your portion and you're still hungry. And the fact that you're still hungry means that your energy, your ATP generation is not up to where it needs to be. And if your ATP generation is not where it needs to be, that means there's not enough fat coming out of your fat stores to meet that need. And there's nothing you can do to make that any faster. Your insulin's high from the cake, so that's probably contributing to it. And the only thing that it achieves to force yourself to maintain that caloric deficit is, well, you will be getting this trickle of fat at the rate limit that it is, which might be more than if you ate more. But you're still going to have not enough energy. And the amount that you calculated to get that 1600 is a false calculation because you're not making up the gap. And your body's going to feel this strain. It's going to start harvesting more calories from muscle than you wish that it had because the fat is already at its limit. And so it's just really suboptimal in many different ways.
Yeah, no, that's very clear and makes total sense. Absolutely. Well, by the way, what's going on with? I mean, I think with the calories, I suppose my take on it is that it can be try to understand how much you eat, etc. Maybe it can be a useful proxy in certain situations, especially at least for me. My conclusion is that if like me, you're eating almost the same every day, then the proxy can work, and whether the calorie amount that you think that you calculated has based on whatever literature and information you get, whether it's off by 10%, 20% or 50, whatever, since you're eating the same anyway, obviously the proxy works somehow. But the funny thing is, I did some calorie counting before I did ketogenic and carnivore diets, and I was typically eating about maybe 2,200 calories a day, and now I'm eating 50% counted in calories. I'm eating 50% more, and before I was gaining weight, and now I'm not gaining weight.
Yeah,
that kind of shows you some of the issues as well, which obviously from your explanation explains it. So it's easy enough to understand when you have the information, but.
Yeah, I think it's partly about fuel partitioning. It's partly about chronically eating under the amount that your body is willing to burn. So if your body has to make do with 1,700 calories a day, but it would be happier at 2,000, then that could explain why moving to 2,000 with the right dietary makeup, your body could happily just fill in all of that energy use. And then there's also maybe some amount of explanation in a low-carb context in particular with uncoupling that can come into play when fat oxidation gets really high.
Yeah, I suppose one of the questions I've got is, have you got any sense or feeling when this is going to be accepted widely, like from people like the diabetes associations, the British Heart Foundation, etc., etc.?
Well, I have a really bad track record of predicting that because I remember when Gary Taubes's book came out in like 2003 maybe, and I thought, this is it. Now everyone will obviously see. I think that was the second time. The first time I read Michael and Mary Dan Eads' book, Protein Power, and there were all these citations. I thought, oh, well, obviously there's all this literature about it, that we must be on the cusp of scientists learning about this, and the whole zeitgeist is going to change. And I was really surprised when that didn't happen. So twice now, I've been really wrong about that, and now I'm a little bit shy to make any more predictions.
It's about zipping it. I just for some reason I it seems I get into these I wouldn't call it discussions, but people ask me about, oh, wow, people I haven't met a long time or whatever, wow, you look totally different. What happened? I tell them what happened. Then they ask a couple of more questions, and then they kind of, you can see they glaze, the eyes glaze over and then they just look at me. Okay, yeah, he's still the same old tinfoil hat guy. Now and I'm not really a tinfoil hat guy at all, not a conspiracy theorist at all, but it's just very, at this point, it's funny.
Sometimes. Yeah, sometimes. We get great enjoyment out of it.
Yeah, I think if you don't, you're just going to be, it's going to be an unhappy life, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's sort of some of the things you're saying does come full circle. This is the last time I'll bring up the eggs, but it makes a lot of sense. It does make a lot of sense with, like, when you said about your body's already feeding itself, and so when you're consuming more fat, it's just basically you're topping up the fuel tank rather than filling it up from reserve.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think the egg diet idea, obviously it's going to be pretty ketogenic if your calories are that low. Your protein's capped at around 100, which is probably ideal, and you don't need any more. And then a little bit more fat than a regular protein-sparing modified fast would allow on top of that. Probably allows you to make up enough of that gap that it addresses the problem of the rate limit of fats. Like, even a healthy person who's got really low insulin is not going to carry enough fat normally to give you your whole moment to moment needs just from the rate limits. And so if you can add just enough to address that without it being protein or carbs, which would cause the insulin to go higher and then slow down your own rate limit. So it's kind of an ideal situation if you can hit that sweet spot of how much to eat that is giving you satiation, so you know that you hit it, but is still allowing the maximum amount to come from your stores.
I'm looking forward to next time already. Like, I've lost 100 pounds, and that was through Keto and Carnivore, but within that week, me and Klaus I think we lost the same, didn't we, Klaus? It was about 2 kilos.
About 2 kilos.
And we went for 5 days this time rather than 7. We just tapped out.
Yeah, we chickened out, yeah. I think we felt that we had enough credibility from the previous one, which was 7 days.
Right. Are you having egg shortages where you are? We are here
Not yet.
In the U.S.
Well, no, but I saw that there's a confirmed case of bird flu in England with a human being, so I'm guessing that there may be shortages soon.
Mm-hmm.
So I might just go and I've got a chicken coop.
Go get some now.
I might just get some chickens, get some ex-battery hen chickens or something like that, and let them live in the garden. Yeah.
Good idea.
Yeah, that would be good. I live in a condo, so no chickens allowed. But yeah, we've had the same egg prices since 2019, I think. Yeah.
Nice.
No inflation, no egg inflation. The rest has gone up. So yeah, it's pretty cheap to live on eggs. But actually, the cheapest protein here in Finland is chicken legs. So whole chicken quarters, I think they're called in the US, and that's the cheapest. Probably they are soy fed and with all the wrong kinds of fats and stuff like that. Anyway,
right.
Eggs are pretty good. But I think the surprise this time, I think, was to lose 2 kilos in 5 days.
Yeah.
While feeling not just satiated, but just completely satiated all the time.
And fantastic energy levels. The only day I struggled was day 1 or 2, I can't remember, and then the energy levels were straight back up. Just feel fantastic.
Yeah, I think my I don't know how it was with you, James, but my fat to protein ratio was a bit higher on fat than eggs alone, because I did quite a lot of fried eggs, and I used butter. And also some scrambled eggs. So I was pretty close to a kind of a standard ketogenic ratio. in calculating calories. So just under 80% of calories in fat and the rest in protein.
Yeah, I had a good few tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil on the top while I was at work, just to have some help it slide down a bit better.
And eggs are what, about 1-to-1 naturally, or a little bit slightly higher?
Yes. Calculating calories, it's I think it's about 60-40. So 60% calories fat and 40% protein. Around that, maybe it could be a little bit over 60 and a little bit under 40 for protein, but around that. So about, the eggs that I'm eating here, they are just over 8 grams of protein per egg and
Nice.
6 point something
Those are
grams
big.
per fat per egg. So, yeah. Yeah, so, but anyway, it's nice to have some fun and games around that.
Exactly. We try and get some enjoyment and challenge ourselves with these sorts of things. I think it's key. Are there any things which you've seen in the world of X recently that's made you question anything or that's enraged you?
I haven't been spending quite as much time on X lately, unfortunately. I like it there, but no, I don't think so, other than this continuing saga of the whole satiety scores, which I find really frustrating. So what are the other components of the score? There's the protein, which we talked about extensively. Fiber. Fiber is an interesting one because if it has no calories, then it shouldn't be able to provide any satiation, right? But I think that actually it does provide some calories. If it's the right kind of fiber, then your gut bacteria are going to convert it into short chain fatty acids and then give you some satiation based on that. But then it's not really fair to say that it's free because you're actually getting calories from it. So
Yes.
the fiber thing is a little bit interesting. I think some people, there is like there's a technical term for stretching the stomach, but I can't remember what it is.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I've used as like a analogy for some people when I'm trying to explain the fact. They're like, oh, that's not a lot of food. I'm like, no, but the calories, not calories, but the foods I'm eating are going to satiate me. They're going to provide my body with everything I need to carry on. And then I would say maybe there's more to it. So I'd say if you just ate a massive amount of cabbage, you're to the point where your stomach is stretching, you're going to have a feeling which is a full stomach, which is different than being satiated. So that's
Very
where
good.
you're sort of going with that. Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can't really fool your body. I mean, you might cause yourself to do that idea of eating less than you were really hungry for because you've gotten into the physical discomfort range. But then it's not going to save you from all those consequences of having inadequate energy and possibly starting to catabolize lean mass.
Yeah, exactly.
What else? The other thing that they bring up, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to switch over to the hedonic one.
Yes. Yeah, good one.
The thing that drives me crazy about that is that I think that my diet is so incredibly hedonistic. Like fat, meat is absolutely amazing. And if I can eat that and get weight loss results, then that seems to fly directly in the face of the idea that people are just eating more because it tastes good and that's why they're getting fat. And I don't want to say that that never happens to people. I used to be really less open-minded about the idea that food could cause addictive behavior, and I'm ready to concede that it can. But I think that it's not as black and white, there's not addictive food necessarily. It has to be a combination of factors of the person's personality and how they're dealing with that. It's not just that this tastes so good and I have no self-control, which is what I think the basic principle behind the hedonic idea in a score is. So just because something tastes bad and I don't want to eat it doesn't really mean that it's satiating either.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good example. No, I think it seems clear that what you say is kind of must be true. It's much more complicated than just saying that, if I eat this, I just get out of control. If that were the case, how come the same persons can then stop doing it?
Yeah. So
like myself.
So can we run through a scenario then?
Yeah.
So, for example, it's Christmas. I say to myself, I'll be bad for 2 days. I have what I want. And then on the third day and the fourth day, I say, I'll just have one chocolate. And then I end up eating half a box of chocolates. What's going on there? Is it because I just have no self-control? Or is it, if I hadn't have eaten the food, I wouldn't have eaten it?
Right.
Does that make any sense?
Because you're weak, James.
It is because
it's you're morally flawed.
Yeah, and so also if we go back to when I found out we were having another child, I stayed carnivore and keto, but the volume of food I ate was exponentially more, and I think that goes back to maybe comfort eating. I felt fine about it, but I just observed the fact that I was just kept eating.
Yeah, that's interesting. It could be, so you felt like you were eating, but that it was not addressing energetic needs, and you just...
I think I just wanted, I wasn't hungry. I just kept eating. So maybe this is something.
But it didn't cause you to gain fat, though, the way it would have if it were something else.
No, not at all. No. I think.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, I think maybe the brain was using a lot more energy, running through scenarios. What have we got to do? Is it going to be smooth? Blah, 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 blah. My brain runs off on tangents. So my brain could have been going into overdrive, expending a lot more energy there. So then subconsciously, I found myself eating more, maybe. So that's probably answers that now we've spoken it through, maybe. And then when it comes to bad food, I know that if I eat something, then it is a cascade effect for the rest of the day, sometimes 2 or 3 days. And then it takes a good bit of effort to snap myself out of that again.
Yeah, and that could be largely because of that fuel partitioning where suddenly your insulin's gone up in response, and now you're just not getting your fat stores, you're not getting as much from anything, and it sort of perpetuates itself.
Yeah, makes sense.
So my body's adapted to running off the fatty acids. I then increase carbohydrate load. My body says, hang on a minute, I'm not getting the nutrients that I'm used to getting. Something's wrong. And then it will start sending the hunger hormones out.
Yeah, your insulin goes up, your insulin level goes up, and then you can't burn fat. Or let's say your fat burning is much more limited.
Right.
Well, thank you for the psychology appointment.
Yeah, anytime.
One thing that I've noticed personally, I tend to be a kind of all or nothing person with things like that. And there's a purely psychological component where I feel like if I break my promise to myself in a small way, then I can get into a mode where it's like, well, screw it, because
yeah, exactly.
It's all, I already did this, so I might as well do this. And that definitely seems like a psychological part.
The game's lost anyway. What the hell?
Yeah. It's bad. I'm a perfectionist.
That's kind of, I'd say that's my thing. If and Christmas is a good one, good example of that. But it takes a couple of days to get back on track then with some focused effort.
Yeah. Thank goodness it doesn't feel like that all the time, right? If I had to go through that willpower every day,
impossible.
I would just, I couldn't do it.
Yeah, I think that's, my guess is that's probably the reason why if people get on a ketogenic or a carnivore an actual ketogenic or an actual carnivore diet, why it's also relatively easy to maintain, because it doesn't require any willpower. And if it does from time to time, it's not very much.
Right.
And
You
at
just get
least
to the point
that's
where the things that would break your diet are no longer compelling. You can walk by
and
them.
it's kind of, and I think the longer you go, I'd say for me, I say it still makes a difference. It's still a good idea not to have the bad, let's say the unhealthy stuff in the house. It makes it easier if you don't see it, if it isn't a possibility. If it takes effort. Oddly enough, when I go grocery shopping, I have no problem going past and not taking any of the stuff which I shouldn't take, pick from the shelves. But
yeah, if there's something in your house, then you might think about it and dismiss it, but it's still there and you know it's there, and the thought can keep coming back and chasing you until your weakest moment.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened at Christmas.
Yeah.
Demons.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Dr. Chris Van Tulleken?
No, I don't think so.
He's got a really good book called Ultra Processed People. I'll send you a link.
Thank you.
And he discusses the keto diet a little bit, but I'll have to check back and get back to you with the gentleman's name, which he met with a number of times. Chris wasn't fully sold on the idea of a keto diet because I think he's tried it in the past and it didn't work for him. But the book holds immense value, and I'm sort of hoping that he makes some movements in the UK to try and help sort of make England into a more of a healthier environment again. And I think it would be great for him to actually have conversations with you, but he's quite a big name for me to try and get in contact with him, if you see what I mean. But I think a conversation between the two of you would be really valuable to sort of help more people, because he's a TV doctor, he's done a lot of different things, but he hasn't shied away from naming and shaming big food and big pharma. So I've got a lot of respect for that. But I think he's keeping himself in the middle ground where he doesn't say too much and he's saying enough to sort of push the boundary slightly, if that makes sense. So
yeah, that's a skill.
Yeah, yeah. I'll send you some links to him later.
Sounds good.
And the other thing, what's your T-shirt? Is that, I think Goody told me what it was, but
This is Zcash. Zcash is
like a crypto.
Yeah, it's a cryptocurrency. It's almost identical to Bitcoin. It was forked from Bitcoin originally, but the difference is that all of the information is encrypted end to end. Actually, Zcash can do transparent and make it exactly like Bitcoin, or it can be shielded. But if you shield it on the blockchain, you can't see anything now because it's encrypted with zero knowledge proofs. So it doesn't say who it's from or where it's going or how much it was. So I think that's really important for financial systems. You really wouldn't want someone to be able to look up, like if you're using Bitcoin a lot and you get paid in Bitcoin, now since your boss paid you, your boss knows your address, and now he can see that you spent it on coffee, or your barista can see what your salary was. And I think that's just not the kind of property you want to have.
Not really.
In a monetary system.
Was the sort of the initial idea of Bitcoin was that you take control of the sort of stability of your own money, and some of the things that I've thought previously is because of that blockchain, and when you hear the countries have been talking about digital currency and the sort of prospect of you will be paid X amount for X division of money, so that you can only spend this on food, you can only spend this on fuel, and they'll be able to track that. And that's the correlations which has made me quite adverse to fully sort of getting on board with some of the cryptocurrencies. But with this ability to encrypt where it's come from, where it's going, that makes a lot more sense to me.
Yeah, I think it's essential. And although governments could obviously use that kind of tracking to control citizens, I also think that I hope that our governments will realize how necessary it is to have that kind of privacy in the same way that they did for the internet when there was first HTTPS. There was not embraced. They didn't want to have that level of privacy, but then they realized you can't just be sending your credit card over the net without these kinds of security in place. And I'm hoping that they will see that if your citizens' spending is transparent to everyone, it's also transparent to foreign countries, and it's also transparent to hackers, and it's just and we're seeing the disappearance of cash. I don't know what it's like where you are. I still carry cash in my wallet, but I hardly ever use it, honestly. And so if I'm using credit cards for every single transaction, I have the same problem where all those companies get to see exactly what I spend my money on, and it's very uncomfortable.
Yes, I'd say in my case, Visa knows exactly everything I do, and especially if they talk to Apple.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Which in its purest form, could be beneficial to us because we could get good advertisement headed our way, which we see things we like. But then you've also got the counter argument, which is leave us alone slightly, just back off a little bit, let us have some freedoms. And one of the other questions is how do you find using AI? Because for me, when I try and ask some questions around certain health topics, I see that these AI systems are obviously full, like they've scrubbed all the data from everything, basically, at this point in time. All the studies, everything that's been copyrighted, they've looked at anyway. And if there's a heavy leaning towards studies which have been funded by big pharma and big food companies, you will get a biased outcome, which isn't the point of an AI in my perspective. I know it's all data
Right.
and then you get that out, but I don't know if there's a way that you can sort of create a correct prompt which you can try and get it to search for any studies which have no conflicts of interest, etc. Like, how are you using AI in your day-to-day life?
Well, when I first started using ChatGPT, I was initially very, very frustrated because not only do they have every piece of literature in the scientific literature without any real kind of analysis, they also have the whole web where people are discussing it and saying what they want to say about it. And a lot of what their answers are developed on are, what a bunch of bloggers or health sites or people selling stuff said about those studies. And so you get back this extremely skewed viewpoint that it's worse than searching the net yourself, because you can't look at that and put a proper evaluation on how much to weigh it, and it doesn't show you where to look for something else, because it kind of the answer that they're going to give is going to be the most mainstream. They're going to ignore any kind of outliers. So I was really frustrated with that. And it may actually have been fixed on ChatGPT now, but a few months ago, somebody told me that Perplexity will always give you citations. So I moved to Perplexity for anything related to health, so at least I could see, if they gave me an answer, what exact paper it was coming from, and I could look for it myself. And then I could sort of target my questions and say, well, no, what about if this? And sometimes I get good results with it, but sometimes I will find that if I press any of those chat machines too hard, they will start to make things up, just literally make things up. Like I'll say, but okay, so you've said this, can you give me 3 citations that would support the idea of this? And I have sometimes literally gotten an author and a paper name and a DOI, and it doesn't exist. It's completely made up.
Yes.
Because I was like pushing so hard, please give me the information. And since they couldn't give it to me, they would finally just give me something to get me off their back or whatever. So that's also really frustrating. And I also find I have to constantly remind the algorithm that I'm not asking for medical advice. So please don't put in this stupid paragraph at the end saying, but you have to consult your doctor. And
the
shut up.
disclaimers.
I am a doctor.
Yes.
Basically, it can be really infuriating, actually, especially because I feel like if they would allow me to take the reins off a little bit, it could be an extremely useful tool, but because of the constraints that are imposed from the outside, I can't use it the way I would like to use it.
Exactly.
I wonder if like if Palantir has something where like Palantir may be more useful if you could input your studies, etc., into it, and because Palantir works in quite a different way. So I'm going to try and reach out to some of the people that I know which invest in Palantir and try to get a coherent answer for you there. But I've got a bit of a vision there, and I think Palantir is probably the best use of AI when it comes to finding some coherency. But I've used Grok. Sorry, go ahead.
I'll make an analogy. If there's a lot of stuff we don't know about the carnivore diet because we don't have very many studies at all where people have actually looked at the exact context that we want to know. So, for example, if we want to know how much of a particular nutrient does a carnivore diet actually require, we can't get that information from. You could have every study in the world, and because that data set isn't part of the data set, you're never going to find it. And I think we have a lot of the same problem with AI generally. They're mining sets of data for answers, and there just isn't the information that we would need to have in there to get the answer that would be correct.
Yeah, there's a lot of anecdotal data on X, isn't there? I think if you can guarantee that someone has not consumed a normal standard diet throughout a set period of time, and they can sort of input data through their posts, that might be a way that you could sort of crowdsource some information. Maybe, I don't know if there's, or like if you created an app that people could sign up to, and then you input how you're feeling on what days, what you've eaten, etc., and have some sort of questionnaire or quiz, and then you could get some information that way.
Yeah, it's further complicated by now you've got to trust people to give you all the information that's relevant. Then also you're still sort of putting your own biases in whenever you ask for certain features. If we had never come up with the idea about seed oils being detrimental, then we could have all this data that refers to fat, and we would never find that the reason why the data is so mixed is because some of the people are eating a lot of saturated fat and other people are eating a lot of linoleic acid. And so because we know to ask for a specific feature like linoleic acid, now we can get more questions. But if we come to the data set with a specific set of features in mind, there are things we could never learn just because we never thought to ask for them.
That makes sense.
Yeah, good points. Yeah, it's I don't know. I get the feeling with use ChatGPT quite a lot, but I get the feeling that it's heavily limited in what it's allowed to, in terms of features that I'm allowed to get access to.
Right.
I get the feeling, distinct feeling, that it often knows or could tell me much more or be much more deeply analytical, but it just doesn't want to tell me.
Yeah.
And even if I browbeat it, it doesn't.
Exactly.
But I've had the experience with the references I've had many times, both in terms of completely empty links or links that don't go anywhere, and then asking for scientific references. You click on the link for something, it says that it's related to whatever, something carnivore, and then you click on it and it's related to whatever, something completely different.
Yeah.
Macular degeneration due to age or whatever, or due to something not diet related. But yeah, it just lies, and it hasn't really gotten better. It's gotten a little bit different, but not really better, unfortunately. Anyway, Amber, what are your in terms of carnivore and carnivore life, low carb, and dietary things. What are your focus areas going forward?
Well, actually, I'd like to go a little bit backwards because there was a lot of time where I wrote things. Either I wrote talks and I never really followed up with a more formal written piece, or I didn't finish writing them. So I have a bunch of orphaned articles and things that I would really like to focus on catching up on. I was doing some part-time work last year and taking some courses, and this year I'm not doing any of that. And so I really want to focus on writing and putting together all the things that I already have and trying to make more integrated ideas from where I am.
Yeah, sounds good. Obviously, I have my thought behind the question is that, the next topic we're going to talk about with you on the next podcast. But anyway,
Yes,
we'll come back to
I'll let you know.
So Klaus has obviously got Riverside. So if there's any time you need it, we can come in as a producer. So if you wanted to record a certain chat, and you can bring a screen up as well. So you can sort of relay a presentation if you ever needed that. We can accommodate that.
Well, that sounds fantastic.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And just contact me or any of us, and we'll set it up. Absolutely. There was one question from Goody, which was, and I have to ask it. So salt and satiety.
Right.
So if you eat more or less salt, how does that affect satiety? Or just for Goody, we have to give him his question.
Well, I'm not sure. I don't know that I've really seen a lot on salt and satiety in particular. I know that too much salt can be kind of an emetic, make you nauseated. So that might make you more satiated. But then there's some people think that eating saltier foods will make them crave more along that sort of hedonic line.
Yeah, Goody.
But that's what he thinks, that it would make you eat more.
Yeah.
I guess I can sort of see that. One interesting thing about salt and taste is that at least some of the evidence seems to show that the detection of salt is at least as much, if not more, about avoiding it than getting it, because you don't want to eat something that's too salty because it does disrupt digestion. It is toxic. You don't want to drink, you don't drink ocean water because it's too salty. And if you tried, you would probably vomit. So I'm in a position where I've become so sensitive to salt. I will salt things occasionally, like broth in particular, I find is more enjoyable with a bit of salt. But I can't eat enough bacon to satiate me because it's too salty for me to eat. So
yeah, agreed.
Yes, same.
So in that sense, it could make you eat less. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Might
have to
depend on
tell
the
Goody
context.
that he needs to salt his food more so he eats less.
Yes, make
He's
it
gonna
all
be very
so
disappointed.
salty. You're only allowed to eat anchovies and bacon.
Yeah.
Now see how much you eat.
Anchovy week. Maybe we can do that next. Yeah. Anyway, Amber, phenomenal, very enjoyable to talk to you, and extremely informative as usual. And
Thank you. I had a really good time.
And I hope we can have you back again soon. Let's try and do an egg week. Just let us know when you're ready, and
Okay.
let's do it together.
Okay. Maybe the end of February, when I'm going to Dave Feldman's conference in Las Vegas called COSI.
Yes.
In the beginning of February. So maybe after I get back from that.
Yeah, maybe.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's better to do when you're not. It's better to do when you can do it undisturbed.
Yeah. I don't want to have dinners out.
Yeah, exactly.
I think when's the 250th anniversary for America? Is it this year or is it next year?
70th year.
Next year. Should we visit America in next year, Klaus?
Absolutely.
1776. Yeah, it must be next year. Let's do that. I'm up for. I'm always up for visiting the USA. I've visited many times. So I'm
Maybe we could get,
Always a good time.
but maybe you could organise some sort of meetup, and we could sort of spread the word through X, and have some presentations and everything like that.
That's a fabulous idea. I could do another carnivore conference, which I keep saying I'm going to do.
Awesome.
I got bitten in 2020, and I haven't brought it back.
Yeah, but anyway, we're definitely up for it. James, I'm not going to promise that I'm not going to visit the States before that. So I might.
Understandable. Yeah.
I might, and I'm not an immigrant, so I'm sure they'll let me in. Sorry.
Are you sure that's not your intention?
It's always been funny to me when I come to the US with a third degree interrogation that I have to go through.
Same as well, though. But whenever I've visited, they've been really strict. Very
strict, yes, yeah. And I have no problem with that, but it was just funny. One of the times I was there with my kids, so I come there, dad with kids, holiday season. Yeah, well, the kids have to go back to school, in 2 weeks. So yeah, we're not gonna. But anyway, how can they know?
Yeah, I'm Canadian first. I got American citizenship in 21, I think. So I definitely had a long time where I was living here on a green card and would cross the border into the States, and I always found it extremely intimidating. And I recall how astonished I was the first time I came through with citizenship and how I was treated completely differently. It's really extraordinary.
Yes, and it's there was a period of time where it was very easy. I'd say in the kind of 2006 to 2012 period, it was not very interrogative, but before that, when I started traveling to the States back in 1990, 91, something like that, very, very strict. Yeah. So, but it was worth the price.
Well, I hope you try.
Now, but I'm hoping now that I'm Danish, so I'm hoping now that if we give Greenland away, then maybe we'll get a special.
Don't do it.
We'll get a special line in immigration, maybe. Anyway. All right, guys. Anyway, thank you very much. Sorry, I'm pressing a little bit, but it's I have my 4 to 5 a.m. Get out of bed, and it's about 9:30 here, so I'm about to head to bed.
All right.
So bedtime calling. Anyway, Egg Week, looking forward to it. Anniversary Carnivore conference. Let's do it.
Sounds good.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks, Amber.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.